this film was because I was very familiar with the whole setup in France of an American family with children there, and children going to one of those, several of those French schools in Paris.
Yeah.
And that was, when I read the book, I thought, well, I know all about this. And then the character of Francis interested me very much. And I was a kind of a Francis type myself. And so, for all those reasons, it was, you know, it gave me good material to, as you say, sort of swim out a little further.
I was curious in this particular movie with these stylized moments, like the teacher coming into the classroom and she's on a conveyor belt, or certainly that.
Well, that's an actual memory of my own. I was the second grade or something. I went to a parochial school, and there was a very formidable superior, mother superior, and from time to time she'd make these absolutely terrifying visits to the schoolroom, and she always seemed to me to be kind of gliding in like an apparition. And she walked in a kind of way that seemed like she was moving in like that. Always, never looked pleased to be there. And, that came from that, and also that quote of Francis's when the teacher wants to keep him in after school, and he said, I couldn't possibly be going to an early dinner party. I actually said that.
So it's like there are two kinds of adaptations. There are the adaptations that you make from fiction into film, and then there's the fact that you're an American who is always making movies about people adopting to another place. You know, I mean, so many of these films are about adaptations or maladaptations.
That's true.
And then, you know, the same thing is true in some of your Henry James movies, you know, like The Golden Bowl and so on.
Well, a lot of our work has really been about that, and maybe it's because the three of us, when we were working, none of us, or
you're speaking of Ruth
Jalvala and Isabel Merchant, we were all from such different places, and we were always, at least one of us was a stranger in a particular film. I mean, Ruth is not Indian, and
she's German, right?
She's German, she was Polish, really. And so there was always a kind of displaced being, the outsider looking at a culture, or you know, a culture acting on an outsider, but
right.
never from the inside.
Right. How does it come about? Did each of you read books and then one would come to the other two and say, let's do this, or was it usually something that you read that you would then ask her to adapt or work with?
It depended. Sometimes, as for instance, are taking up Henry James. I mean, she was convinced that Henry James is just the author for me, and that I really ought to. In fact, she said he was, in terms of making movies, that he was writing for you, Jim, and but we never really got onto it till quite a bit later, and when I started reading James, and it was her suggestion. Actually, I found one of those novels being sold by a vendor of books on the railway station in Calcutta. Imagine. And I found Mrs. Bridge there in the railway station in Calcutta. And I read it on the train. I thought, this would make a wonderful film. And I gave it to her to read. She said, it's a wonderful book, but it'd be a terrible film. And many years passed, and then Mr. Bridge came out, and many years passed, and then it just so happened that I was invited to have dinner. A friend of mine took me to dinner with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Yeah. And Joanne Woodward was already involved in Mrs. Bridge. It was to perhaps be a television film. And I said, why should you do it for television? Why don't we do it as a movie? This kind of thing. And then Paul said, well, if I like the script, I'll be Mr. Bridge. It all came about at the dinner. And he did like the script. And Ruth agreed after 20 years, I guess, that maybe it would be sort of fun to do, and she would enjoy doing, and maybe it could be done. And that's the story of that.
I think they're both extraordinary in it, and they certainly are a convincing married couple.
Yeah. Well, the Enforcer was slightly different. We made A Room with a View for the reason that when I was younger, I really loved being in Italy and being with Italians. And then there was a sort of 20-year hiatus while I was working in India. And I thought, when I read Room with a View, I would really like to go to Italy and make a film. And that was the reason we made that particular book.
And then it clicked. It was.
And well, we didn't expect that. You never know when something's going to happen like that. And but it was really a sort of a selfish desire on my part to go to Italy, and with all of them, I mean, Ismail, there were certain things that Ismail wanted to do. I mean, he wanted to make Heat and Dust, and he said that's where you just got to make Heat and Dust, and so forth. And well, for each of them, there's some kind of reason. It doesn't always have to do just with the book and what's in the book.
Is it different when you make an adaptation from a book that's considered a classic like Howard's End or Golden Bowl, or when you take something like Kayla Jones' book? Did you feel freer in some ways, or how does that work out?
I think it's the same with every. If you're going to take up a book and you really like the book and it seems worth it to you to really get into it and do it and spend all the time on it and spend a lot of other people's money on it. It seems to me that when you do that, you're doing it really out of love and kind of an admiration for the book and for the writer. And it's crazy to depart from it too much. And so you're always, you want to give the essence of the book, but of course you want to give your own essence. And I think the work is the same. I mean, you have all the same concerns, say if you make the Golden Bowl, or if you make a modern story like Le Divorce or Soldier's Daughter. There's just as many difficult things to trip you up and on both kinds of books. One of the reasons for that is that you have the time on television to really go into a book, and you can develop. In many classic novels, there are many subplots and subsidiary characters, which in a film you don't have time to develop, and you have to cut all that out. And that's one of the reasons for the popularity, I think, of some of those big books and the BBC doing it, because they make a series of it.
In a film like Remains of the Day, you had the added problem of a kind of I don't know if it's fair to say an unreliable narrator, but let's say a slightly blinded narrator. So when you're doing a film, the camera eye suggests a third person, no matter what the original source material was. So how do you convey that sense of a kind of blinkered perspective, let's say?
There was an actual way to convey it, which it didn't occur to me until later. It was too late. You made the film. There are people in England, usually upper class people in England, and they also exist in this country, who when they talk to you, and this is more middle-aged people, when they talk to you, they close their eyes. They really do. And they're saying all kinds of things with their eyes closed. And it's hard to get used to it. If you're trying to have the conversation, and I thought...
Not too much eye contact.
I thought, if only I had thought of that with Lord Darlington, it would have been so right and appropriate that he would have his eyes closed, and much of what he said when he was talking about so many terrible things, that he'd have his eyes closed.
There was this idea that an auteur had to write his own original screenplay or something like that.
Well, I had such a good example when I started out of someone who did not do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes he did, but on the whole he did not, and that was Satyajit Ray.
Yes.
And he worked from a number of
Of course, like the Apu trilogy, you know.
Apu trilogy. Well, he wrote a lot of the world of Apu himself, but the first 2/3.
Two Daughters and...
We don't anything by Tagore or Charlotta.
Yes,
So many.
exactly. See, we were so ignorant of Indian literature that everybody thought that, you know, he just pulled them off out of his sleeve.
No, he felt like any director might feel that these are wonderful stories and wonderful characters and wonderful places. I want to use it. I want to, so I can do something with this. I'm sure it was a basic thing like that. It's always a basic thing. I mean, you read something and you like the characters, you like the situation, and maybe it's even sort of thrilling.
In terms of adaptation, specifically with casting, since you're working from characters that are coming off the page, how meticulous are you about really waiting for a character that really fits that? Because, I mean, so many of these characters just seem like, I mean, the actors themselves seem like they are those characters. So how long or to what extent do you sort of sacrifice what's on the page for maybe the actor or vice versa?
Well, you know, sometimes when you read something and you think, and you can imagine a particular actor or actress in that part. I mean, it just seems to be made for them. But then by the time you comes around to making the movie, that person's not available, or maybe they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Often they don't like the part. And we've made films where, like the principal female part's been turned down by every actress. They think it's just not attractive or something, and it's been really hard to find somebody. So you have to. I mean, you have to go through a lot of people before you actually have the cast for all kinds of reasons.
Thank you very much.